Of all the meetings I've had with animals, my first was by far the most frightening. During the late summer, I pitched a tent on the site where I had planned to build my cabin. I was naked at the time, bathing in the river after a day of tripping wood for my cabin. In fact, I had just jumped into the fast-moving water and was happily brushing my teeth when an unexpected movement caught my eye upstream. Shunning modesty, I pulled myself up onto a tree trunk to take a closer look, and my heart jumped into my mouth. A huge bear had waded up its shoulders into the river and was straining to get a better look at me. I saw it lift its vast head to sniff the air, then, catching a whiff of me, turn and bound out of the water at a surprising pace. Initially, I felt relieved, until I saw it was trying to outflank me along the shore, its small, eager eyes fixed on me all the time. I'd been told by the local Indians that to be killed by a bear is one of the worst possible ways to go. Bears don't kill people quickly. They are too powerful to be concerned about us getting away. They simply pin you down like a cat with a mouse and start to eat. They favor the soft tissue around the lower legs and buttocks, which they rip up with gusto. They are oblivious to your screams. Although black and grizzly bears will both kill and eat people given the chance, it is the smaller black bear that is often most dangerous. Like all bear knowledge, facts such as this have been hard-won. In my case, I was lucky enough to have been armed, although my gun was on the shore, far out of reach. But knowing it was my only chance of survival, I crept slowly towards the shore, where my rifle hung from an upturned root. All the while, the bear kept coming, waving his nose around in search of my scent, but unable to get a really good sniff. Their eyesight is very poor, so they rely on smell. This, in retrospect, bought me valuable time. I loaded a round into my rifle with a shivering hand and readied myself for whatever might come, which turned out to be a full-blown attack. Finally, catching a good sniff of me and deciding I was really good prey, this huge killer dropped to all fours and began to bound towards me along the riverbank at full tilt. As long as I live, I will never forget the sight of that powerful animal charging directly towards me, its nostrils flared and its teeth bared. In those adrenaline-charged seconds, I was experiencing one of man's most ancient fears, the prospect of being overpowered and eaten alive. I, like many others, had made the mistake of assuming that bears are slow and lumbering. I was wrong. This bear moved with the speed and agility of a cat, and I had only a couple of rounds with which to stop him. Suddenly, however, he veered sideways and disappeared into the scrub, and I lowered the rifle, light-headed with relief. But then I heard a crashing within the bush. He was now coming at me through the thick undergrowth. The advice used to be that if you were unlucky enough to be attacked by a bear, you should drop and play dead. With grizzly bears, this tactic was often successful, and many people survived even after being badly mauled. But it was soon discovered that the same tactic did not work with black bears, who would simply sit on their helpless victims and start eating. These days, it is recommended that if faced with a grizzly attack, you should lie prone on your stomach with fingers clasped over the back of your neck. If a black bear attacks, however, I certainly wouldn't have outrun my black bear, and so, reluctant to shoot unless it was my only option, I began shouting, making as much noise as possible in an attempt to scare him off. And up to a point it worked. He slowed down and then stopped uncertainly, peering at me myopically from just a few yards away. In that moment, we were both making a decision. He was sizing me up to make a final move, probably a fatal lunge, and I was trying to establish whether I could keep my cool long enough to get out of the vital round. Neither of us moved. For minutes, 3, maybe 4, but it seemed like hours. And then, with a snort, he turned slowly around and lumbered back into the bush. I felt like the most fortunate man alive. Number 3. This incident took place in early 2014 during a trip to Taiwan. I was studying at the University of Hong Kong at the time, and during a break in the semester, 4 of my friends and I decided to go on a short holiday to the country's capital, Taipei. Since I was already halfway through my year in Hong Kong, I wanted to travel around Asia as much as possible. And by this point, the only other place I had been was Thailand. So needless to say, I was super stoked when we arrived in Taipei. We did all the touristy stuff you'd expect, checking out the city, going to the top of Taipei, 101, and of course, appreciating the local bar scene. A lot of drinks were had, and a lot of vomit was spilled. But the people were so friendly, and despite the embarrassing state that we were all in, we still managed to make some friends on the street while shotgunning beers outside of a convenience store. Essentially, we all fell in love with the city, and after exploring the urban areas extensively, 3 of us decided to get in touch with Taipei's natural beauty by hiking to the top of Elephant Peak, just outside the city. It didn't seem like a long or arduous trek and just sounded like a fun way to spend one of our days there. It would also provide us with an awesome view of the city. So, in the morning, we decided to go. 2 of our friends went to further explore the city, whilst my friends Nick, Greg, and I put in our proverbial hiking boots and caught a train to the bottom of the mountain. We began our journey to the top, and my memory is a little hazy, but I think we didn't take the usual route since we didn't encounter anybody for a long while. Obviously, this was fine. The 3 of us were happy to simply be soaking in the outdoors away from the bustle of the nearby city. It was all just general forest that surrounded us. But because it was in Taiwan, it had that exotic vibe that made the hiking experience feel fresh and new. It was about an hour into the trek and we still hadn't seen anyone. We weren't even sure if we were going the right way, but since we were confident about the way back and had already come this far, we just kept venturing further into the forest. We reached a path that led up to a steep hill, and from what we had researched, we were all sure that this was the way up to the first checkpoint of this more obscure trail. We started hiking up, when something catches my attention. I point out to Nick and Greg, and out of the bush on our right appeared a dog, a wild dog, no collar and mangy looking. It wasn't growling, but was staring us down, standing tall and strong, like one of those Chinese food dog statues. The 3 of us stopped and stared back at it. What's he doing out here by himself, I thought. Unfortunately for us, this was only the alpha. When we finally took our eyes away from it, we noticed that a large number of other dogs had appeared out of seemingly nowhere, almost as if they had snuck up on us. There must have been around 20 to 25 of them, all medium or large sized. Strangely, there was a variety of breeds. I don't know much about wild dog packs, but I assumed they would all be the same breed. None of us said that we were scared. In fact, the 3 of us didn't really say anything. There was some nervous joking from Greg about how he hoped we all had our rabies vaccination and the like, which was followed by a similarly nervous laughter. But it was obvious that we all thought something might go down. I remember back to our accommodation in Hong Kong, where we would regularly hear wild dogs in the hills behind our complex go crazy each night as they fought each other or hunted for other creatures to kill. My mind couldn't help but jump to the conclusion that this group of wild dogs had similar bloodthirsty intentions. By this point, we were basically surrounded. I had a large, sharp rock in my hand that I had picked off the ground in case they came charging at us. Not that the 3 of us would have been able to fight off this many dogs, but in some warped, animalistic way, I suppose I might at least be able to take one with me or something. I guess in situations like this, instinct takes over. And that seemed logical to me at that moment. Since I have 2 dogs of my own, I knew that in dog language, eye contact was confrontational. I remembered that to convince a dog you weren't a threat, that you should yawn, lick your lips, and not look at them directly in your eyes. This might all be bullshit in reality, but it's just what I remembered. So we all just averted our eyes, focused on the trail, and slowly walked past them, continuing up the path. Looking back, we could see that they were following us. At least 20 sets of intense eyes locked onto us. As tempting as it may have been to run up the path, any idiot knows that these dogs could have outrun us. So we tried to keep our cool and just continued upwards. When we reached the checkpoint, we saw that first sign of human life in a long while. Just a normal-looking guy chilling at the viewpoint with around 10 other dogs around him. I think of this guy as the king of dogs, since from the way they were interacting with him, it was clear that they were all his. At this point, the dogs that had been following us had caught up and returned to their master. We all said a silent "thank the Lord" to ourselves. The scraggly old dogs weren't strays after all. Or maybe they were, but they were at least not man-eaters. We had a quick look at the views from this point and then swiftly moved onwards. After about 5 minutes, we reached what can only be described as a makeshift ladder that we had to climb in order to continue. Doesn't look particularly safe, consisting of a few loosely nailed planks of wood and a chain handle grip all the way up, and would require some upper body strength since it was close to a vertical incline. We debate about what we should do for a few seconds when we're interrupted by something once again. The sound of an extremely loud horn, followed by a chorus of about 50 dogs howling in unison, all going nuts, like really nuts. It was like something out of a Lord of the Rings battle scene, like a horn of war. We all drew the conclusion that the king of dogs was summoning his hounds and ordering them to hunt us down. Fuck it, we're climbing up this thing right now. Long story short, we make it to the top of this fairly dangerous, rickety, ladder-ish thing at top speed and encounter nothing strange for the rest of the hike. In fact, we made it to the top of Elephant Peak. It was all right, nothing mind-blowing. But we took a few pictures and shared a few laughs about the whole ordeal. The rest of the trip was awesome, and the three of us are all pretty confident that the horn and the guy with all the dogs were harmless and probably unconnected. In hindsight, I'm quite glad this all happened, as it has given me a funny story to tell whenever someone asks about traveling or whatnot. But at the time, I have to say that I was certain that we were going to be torn apart by wild dogs. But don't let it put you off going to Taipei. That place is extremely awesome. Number 2. I'll be the first to say that all this stuff could have taken place in my head. The mind is a freaky thing and can play some pretty trippy tricks on you. Sorry for the length. Whenever I was scared as a kid, my dad always told me that in life you should not be scared of ghosts, fear the living because they can actually hurt you. In my late teenage years, I came into some money after my father committed suicide and I received an inheritance from him. At the time of my dad's passing, he and my mum owned a cabin up in Oregon by Mount Bachelor. The cabin had been put up for sale since my mum could no longer afford the payments and renting it out was not covering the repayments either. The cabin was set to go on the market for sale in less than a month and was in the process of finalizing all the paperwork with the realtor and lawyer. So for that month's time, the cabin was not going to be rented out any longer and was going to be vacant. I saw this as a chance to get away for a while and clear my head in light of all the things going on. I quit work, packed up my snowboarding gear, grabbed my dog and headed up in my dad's car to the cabin. Now, this was our family cabin that my parents rented out throughout the year when we were not using it. I had the keys to the cabin and also had the code for the alarms, so I did not feel the need to stop at the rental management company and advise them of my stay. My first 2 days at the cabin were normal and nothing out of the unusual happened. I spent my days playing with my dog in the snow, snowboarding, and the evenings playing PlayStation or listening to music, drinking and smoking on the balcony. I had already stocked up on food, cigarettes, and liquor, so I was pretty much a shut-in aside from the occasional out to hit the slopes. With my dog as company and DVDs and PlayStation as entertainment, I was quite content and started to feel relaxed after all the drama that had preceded my outing. The cabin itself was 2 stories. Bottom story had the living room and a side guest bedroom along the small kitchen. Upstairs had another 2 rooms along with a walkout balcony attached to the master bedroom. Most of my time there was spent either in the living room, kitchen, or master bedroom. The 3rd day came around and I was going through my usual routine of playing with my dog. His name was Midnight, by the way, and he also since passed. I was playing games and watching DVDs. That day it was pretty heavy snowfall, so I did not like trekking down the hill to the main road in my car and decided to stay in. That's when things started getting a little weird. In our area, there were only 2 other cabins adjacent to ours, maybe a block away from each other. All other cabins aside from these 2 were around a mile away from ours. Surrounding us was mostly forest and very tall pine trees. Both these cabins were empty, and from the past couple of days, I knew that no one was currently staying there. It gave enough background, and I'm going to jump into the weirdness now. Around midday, while outside with my dog, I noticed what looked like footprints in the snow around the area surrounding our cabin. It was still snowing, so the footprints looked semi-fresh, like someone had been there in the last 20 to 30 minutes before me. I thought that maybe someone was staying in the cabin near me that I may have missed. Maybe they were shut in like me. Alright, whatever. The prints led away from my cabin and they disappeared in the snow towards the denser parts of the trees. I disregarded the footprints and went back inside. Nighttime came around and I decided to head to bed. My dog Midnight was lying on the bed with me when I noticed his ears perk up and he stood still in a listening position. This was followed by him quickly jumping off the bed and running downstairs to the living room. I laid in bed, staying silent. I was kind of freaked out and could hear him moving around downstairs back and forth. After about 5 minutes, he ran back upstairs to me and started to do his doggy dance for the sign that he had to pee or that he wanted to go outside. Shit. Well, fine, I guess. I can't say no to him, so we both went downstairs to the outside driveway for him to do his thing. Only he didn't want to pee. As soon as we were outside, he started to pull on his leash, trying to drag me to where he wanted to go. He kept looking into the dense part of the trees where the prints had been earlier. But he also kept sniffing the side of the house and looking up towards the roof. After he figured out that I was not going to go to where he wanted, he sat himself down and just stared into the darkness. A bit unusual for him, but alright. Maybe there are forest animals out there he wants to chase down. But fuck this. I didn't want to chance anything, so I pulled him back inside and we both headed back upstairs. Around half an hour later, I was lying in bed when I heard what sounded like hooves walking on my roof. It was only a series of around 6 steps, and I rationalized that it could have been a pine cone falling from a tree onto the roof, or maybe a kind of hearted forest animal running around. But here's the thing. The steps seemed to be paced apart like a man-length stride, so it was really freaking me out. Midnight also heard the noise and was quick to run to the balcony screen door expecting me to let him out. Alright, you know what? I'm a tough guy, and at the time, I considered myself to be fairly well built and strong enough to handle myself. So I grabbed my coat and shoes along with my cigarettes and flashlight and went out onto the balcony. Fuck it, right? As soon as I was outside, I lit up my cigarette and started canvassing the roof with my light. Nothing there, and the snow on top was undisturbed. Weird. Must have all been in my head. What about Midnight hearing the noise? Maybe he was feeding off my fear or paranoia. I started to calm down and relax again. My eyes started to adjust to the darkness, and I kept smoking and just staring at the stars and trees next to our cabin. And that's when I saw it. In a tree that was a little taller than our cabin and around 20 feet from the balcony, I saw what looked like a man crouched in a squatting position in between 2 branches. It was squatted on one branch and its arms were extended above its head, holding onto the branch above it. Fuck me, what the fuck is that? I wasn't sure if I was really seeing this thing and stood just staring and sat there motionless. I noticed Midnight stand up and start pacing behind me and lightly barking at the same time. The thing still didn't move. I put my cigarette out and was debating on shining the light in the thing's direction, but something in my head kept screaming not to. So I walked backwards to the inside of the room and pulled Midnight in with me. Once inside, I locked the door and shined the light in the thing's direction, but there was nothing there. I shoved the curtains to the screen door and retreated back to bed, but later on in the night I heard light tapping at the screen door, like someone was tapping on the glass with their fingers. It was consistent and did not stop for nearly an hour. Midnight seemed to stare at the door, but he wouldn't go near it anymore. The weirdest part was that I had a feeling like something or someone was inviting me to open the door. But at the same time, I kept hearing my dad's voice in my head telling me to stay in bed and not to do it. I listened to my dad's voice and just stayed where I was. I eventually passed out and woke up in the morning and everything was normal. The rest of the week I spent there was non-eventful and nothing else out of the ordinary happened. I totally admit that it could have all been in my head. A lot of stuff was going on at the time, so I was pretty fucked up from all the drama. But it was really weird. Number 1. Okay, so this happened to me a couple of years ago. I'm a male that lives in Alaska, so I've had my fair share of crazy outdoor experiences. I've been in close encounter situation with bears, I've been surrounded by wolf packs while hunting, I've swam with a pod of orcas. Nothing, however, comes close to what I'm about to tell you. I used to go hiking all the time. I live on a large island in southeast Alaska, and there's a myriad of trails to hike in the area. This one time, I decided that I would do a night hike, something different. And hey, maybe I'd get a glimpse of the northern lights. Anyway, I got all my gear ready for a typical wilderness hike: camel bag, trail mix, rope, knife, flashlight, bear spray, and my Winchester 1200 12-gauge pump-action shotgun, which was loaded with 3-inch Magnum slug rounds. For people that aren't gun savvy, this is one of the most powerful rounds on the planet. I always pack this firearm when hiking alone because it's impossible to tell what might happen when entering the Alaskan wilderness. I left my house at probably 7 in the afternoon. You have to remember that in Alaska during the summer it stays light for a long time. The trail I was going to hike started a few miles inland, and it runs on a gradual incline for a few miles, ending at the lake in the mountains. When I got on the trail ahead, I grabbed my pack and shotgun and headed up. The going was good. It hadn't rained in a while, so the ground wasn't muddy and wet. When I reached the top, I posted up on this old twisted red cedar tree and watched out across the lake. I remember seeing salmon jumping and even a beaver swimming. I stayed for a few hours in the hopes of seeing an aurora borealis activity. I guess I shouldn't have been surprised to see none, since it's such a rare occurrence. However, what I was surprised about was the lack of animals up there. Normally, when hiking, ravens and other birds are loud as hell, and it's not uncommon to spot mink and marten and occasionally bear and deer. There was nothing up there though. It was dead quiet. Now, I'd always heard about that feeling of being watched, but I never believed it until that exact moment. I still can't put my finger on it to this day, but I just felt like something was observing me. Because of this and the fact that it was getting late, I felt uneasy to say the least, so I decided to pack up and hike down. It was a little past dusk then, and darkness was fast approaching. It wasn't long after I left before I began hearing footsteps. They sounded bipedal, but whatever was making them was massive, and there was multiple sets of footsteps. I could clearly hear 2 creatures on the right side of the trail and on the left side. I guess that due to the recent lack of rain at the time, it was easier to hear the footsteps on the semi-dry moss and pine needles. Anyways, as I was hiking down the trail, whatever was making the footsteps was following me. I was really confused at this point because the only logical explanation I had for the footsteps was bear. Looking back on it though, I don't know what I was thinking. Bears don't move in groups. And it should have been obvious that the sound of 2 legs walking as opposed to 4 is radically different. However, at the time it was the only thing I could think of. The steps the creatures made were loud. It almost sounded louder than a person that is walking right next to you. I could tell that whatever was following me was probably 25 yards out on either side of the trail. As a side note, the undergrowth and foliage up there is thick, making it hard to see more than 15 yards. Due to this statistic, I didn't have a visual on the creatures. Now at this point, it was dark, and I had my flashlight out. I probably made about 1.5 miles progress when I came to the muskeg I had passed through on the way up. I had a slight feeling of relief since that muskeg gave me a clear field of view. I walked out into the middle and began scanning the tree line. Now what I'm about to say next still makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up and my eyes water. I shined the light back at about 4:30 and the trail being 12, and I saw two pairs of huge red eyes staring back at me. At that moment, I just froze in fear. I probably held the flashlight on the eyes for 10 seconds or so, but it felt like forever. What really terrified me wasn't the color of the reflecting eyes, but how high up they were. Using rough estimates from the trees near the creatures, I would guess that one pair of eyes was about 7 feet high, while the other pair was about 8.5 feet, which means the figures were taller. These numbers alone rule out every known creature on the island. There are no brown bears in this part of Alaska, and black bears basically max out at 7 feet when standing on their hind legs. At this point, I didn't know what to think. What I did know was that whatever was watching me most likely had ill intentions, and that I needed to get out of there now. As I had my flashlight on the two figures on the right side of the trail, I heard some brush moving just adjacent to them, on the opposite side of the trail. I'd completely forgotten about the third creature. At that instant, I went into fight or flight mode. I don't know what prompted me to, but I just turned around and sprinted down the trail. I ran the fastest and hardest I've ever run in my entire life. As I was running, I could hear whatever had been following me now running as well. They sounded a bit closer to the trail now, but 10 times louder. I could hear the creatures bulldozing the brush. The scary thing was that they were moving just as fast as I was, even though they were having to traverse through the uneven forests while I had the flat trail. I remember this part very poorly, but I reached the trailhead much quicker than I thought, probably a couple of minutes. I got to the car and dug for the car keys as quickly as I could. To put this scene into perspective, the lot is a big open area with the trailhead on one side and the road on the opposite, running perpendicular to the lot. The car was parked facing the trailhead, so I had to pack up and turn 90 degrees to get back onto the road. When I got in and turned on the lights, the whole trail and surrounding woods were lit up. Standing on the trail was this massive creature. There is a wooden post in the center of the trail entrance that has a Bear County warning sign and a few other things. Using that as a frame of reference, the sign being about 4 foot tall, the creature I saw must have been roughly 9 feet tall. The shoulders were massive, being the width of the sign. It was hard for me to figure its weight, but I'd say probably well over 600 pounds. Now, this was like the only time during the whole hike I got a good look at the face. It looked very human-like. The closest thing I could compare it to is how I imagine a Neanderthal face looking. It had big round eyes that clearly reflected the light, and for the most part, its face lacked hair. Its body was coated in thick black hair, that of which seemed thicker near the shoulders and head. Anyways, the thing just stared at the car and then turned right, my left, and looked into the woods. Evidently, it was looking at its two friends that I had seen up at the musket. This all happened very quickly, and I reversed out and drove away. Ever since that day, I have done little hiking. I've definitely not gone hiking alone. What I have done, though, is tons of research on the creature that I'm sure I saw. Kushtaka, which is the local native name for Bigfoot. I never believed in these things, but this experience made me a firm believer. I've read books about sightings in the region, including a story about fishermen being abducted out of a place called Moon Lake. What has surprised me is, for the most part, encounters with these creatures, from what I have read, tend to be abrupt, accidental, and harmless. My encounter seemed to be the polar opposite. To me, it is clear that I was being hunted. Some may wonder why I didn't use my shotgun to defend myself. After all, I have brought it for this very reason. To be truthful, I felt like what I was packing wasn't going to stop these things. I felt completely defenseless. All I can say is, be careful out in the wilderness. You never know what you might encounter. G'day, mates. So, I guess the question on everyone's mind is which story belonged to a fellow Scary Stories channel. Well, If you guessed number 3, you were correct. I guess the other question you're all asking is to who did this story actually belong? Did it belong to Lazy Masquerade or Dr. Horror? Well, if you guessed Lazy Masquerade, you're correct. So mates, like I said at the start of the video, don't forget to go check it out, Lazy Masquerade and Dr. Horror, as one of them has my own personal story too in their latest video. Try and guess which one it is. Big shout out to Lazy and Doctor on this one. It was great to collab with both of you, and I look forward to doing it again, guys. Make sure you go show those mates some love, guys. Also want to give a big personal shout out to Corbin McCord for the last story. That story was a subscriber's story, and the picture of the trail is the real trail that Corbin trekked with his encounter. Thanks again, mate, for sharing this with me on Facebook. Don't forget to follow me on Facebook and Twitter to share your stories, guys, and to get all the goss too. And thanks again for watching, guys. We've hit 50,000 subscribers in blistering speed thanks to all of you. So don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you're new to the channel so we can keep this momentum going.
تعرف إن آسيا بنت عمك وكانت حبك الأول. ظافر كانت حبي الأول. إحنا اللي بينا خلاص انتهى. وإيه اللي خلاها تسيبك؟ ما هو من عمايلك السودة. أنا كنت أتغير، والله كنت أتغير، بس هي ما صبرتش وسابتني في نص الطريق. لازم تتجوزها يا ظافر، مبقاش ينفع. وبعدين أنا راجل متجوز، عايزني أتجوزها ليه؟ اقعد يا ظافر، اقعد وأنا أفهمك على كل حاجة. وبالنسبة لمراتك فسيب الحكاية دي عليا. آسيا مش هيتجوزوا، يعني مش هيتجوزوا يا بنتي. هو عايز يتجوزك، وبعدين انت بتحبيه وهو كمان بيحبك. وايه اللي فكروا بيا؟ وبعدين ده راجل متجوز، ازاي يتجوزوا؟ احرق قلب مراته؟ حرام عليكم، سيبولي انا اللي فيا مكفيني. آسيا ما تعمليش في نفسك كده، هو بيحبك. أنا بقيت مشوهة يا بسمة ومبقتش أنفع، لا ليه ولا لغيره. أبوس إيديكم، سيبوني، أنا تعبانة قوي. خلاص يا حاج، أنا هتجوزها ومش هسيبها، ومهما كانت دي بنت عمي. هو ده الكلام يا ولدي. آسيا سمعاني؟ سمعاني؟ غضي يا آسيا. تعالي يا أم مصطفى، نتصل بالدكتور يوسف. بتخش باسم على ظافر، استرها يا رب. هتعمل ايه دلوقتي يا ظافر؟ هتيجي اي برفان من عندك. هروح اقول لبابا ان آسيا فاقت. انت ايه اللي جابك هنا وبتعمل ايه؟ وبعدين ايه اللي حصل؟ انت اغمى عليك يا آسيا، وانا هنا علشان كنت بفوقك. طيب اتفضل من هنا، مش عايز اشوفك ولا اسمع صوتك. ايه الكلام الوحش ده؟ ايه الكلام اللي انت بتقوليه ده يا آسيا؟ يا أخي مش هيتجوزك، مش هيتجوزك يا ظافر، حتى لو عملت ايه. انت ليه أناني كده؟ مش فارق معك مراتك؟ مش فارق معك حرقة القلب اللي هتحسها إيمان؟ وبعدين أنا منفعكش ليه يعني؟ يكون في حد دخل حياتك